In the last lecture, I asked you to think through an issue that you're working on in terms of matters of fact, value, and policy. Remember, we're in this realm of trying to figure out whether or not we need to have a counter-argument, and if so, what issues are clash points, and now we're dealing with, well, once you figured out those clash points, how's a good way to respond in a way that's still going to be persuasive? So as we're working through this, one thing that'll come up is you realize not all points merit attention. You have to distinguish between really important and less important clash points. Now, certainly, I don't think that many of your major clash points can be ducked or avoided. So here in Seattle, there was an issue that came up a couple of times, finally passed, was rescinded, passed again, and it was a ban on plastic bags, recyclable plastic bags at grocery stores. So the issue was, those who were in favor of the bag ban said, there's so much recyclable waste being generated by grocery stores in particular. People go to the grocery store, they buy their groceries, and they're put in these thin plastic bags. So, an average family of four is bringing home from a weekly grocery store trip 10 to 15 recyclable bags. Okay. Those in favor of the bill said, well, that's recyclable waste. That's creating garbage. It's bad for the environment, and it's something we can easily avoid. If we ban bags, plastic bags, then people can bring recyclable bags, and they can bring their canvas bags to the grocery store. So this was debated a number of times here in Seattle. Now, opponents of the bag ban said that the bill wouldn't make much of a difference to recyclable waste. This is striking at the very core of the argument for the bag ban. And it had sort of seeped into popular talk around the ban. So an advocate for the bill, if they were going to be persuasive to those who disagreed, or if they were going to be persuasive to those who didn't really know too much about the bag ban, they had to explain how it would significantly reduce recyclable waste. This was something that couldn't be ducked. They couldn't just plug their ears up and hope for the best. That's something that had to be addressed. So what I want to talk about is 4 basic ideas for responding to counter-arguments without making things worse. You want to be persuasive. You want to entice people to agree with you, not beat them up. Right? You're not going to punch them in the face and hope that they agree with you. That's not what rhetoric does. We're not in that realm. We're trying to convince, persuade, draw them to our side. You don't get that by saying, the reason you should agree with me is because you're an idiot. And you would understand that were you not an idiot. Catch 22. No one's going to agree with you if you're doing that. So you want to find a way of being able to address their concerns in a way that is inviting. This is part of your ethos as a speaker, but it's also part of strategy and figuring out how you're putting that speech together, because you're distinguishing between what do I have to include in order to be persuasive for this audience and what can I avoid this time around. So the first thing I want to suggest is look for an easy win. Introduce new evidence that maybe that audience is unfamiliar with, or challenge existing preconceptions. So a number of years ago, I had someone who was arguing for increased support for nuclear energy here in the U.S. Now, this was before Fukushima, so the speech would have to very much be different now. But she was arguing this in front of an American audience. And the issue was many Americans have this notion, have a fear of nuclear energy because of the threat of a meltdown. And so what she was doing was trying to bring in new evidence that said, your fear about a meltdown is based on older technology at nuclear energy plants. This new pebble technology actually significantly reduces the threat of a meltdown. So the audience had a notion about what was bad about nuclear energy, and she was introducing new evidence to say, that's actually no longer accurate. Not calling them foolish, but introducing new evidence and trying to be persuasive in that way. The second thing you might consider doing as you find these stasis points clash points in your debates is think about showing the unintended consequences of the other position. Remember when we talked about stock issues, we talked about social and material consequences. So you can sort of tap into that a little bit as a persuasive strategy. Again, here in the state of Washington, we had a debate over a public smoking ban. So banning smoking in public places like bars and restaurants. So people were for it or against it for various reasons, but one of the aspects of the bill was there was a 25-foot barrier. So not only could you not smoke inside of a restaurant, but you couldn't smoke 25 feet from the entrance of a restaurant. So one of the compelling arguments at the time said, you should vote against this bill. and didn't try to say, oh, smoking's not bad for your health, or oh, it's totally fine to smoke. Not challenging that, saying, I agree with that, but the reason you should vote against this bill is because this 25-foot rule is not going to work. Why? If you're downtown Seattle and you have to go 25 feet from the entrance of a restaurant to smoke, you're in the middle of the street. So you're weighing sort of short-term consequences of being hit by a car against the long-term health consequences of smoking. And they said, well, so how are you going to enforce this? Are cops walking around with a 25-foot, ruler? So the argument was saying, here's a consequence of this bill, and here's a reason to vote against the larger bill, without taking into, not trying to debate whether or not smoking was good or bad. Okay? Third thing that you might consider is containing an argument within a larger concern. And I'm going to show a clip here. Seattle, like a number of cities in the U.S., has laws pertaining to wearing bike helmets. If you're on a bike, you have to wear a helmet. And I'm going to show a clip. This is from our then Seattle Mayor, Greg Nichols, and this is a call-in show. So he's being asked the questions, and I've edited it, so you see the bike messenger basically challenging the validity of helmet laws, and I want you to listen to how the mayor responds to that. So there is a clash point here, but listen to how the mayor tries to be persuasive, if not to that bike messenger, then certainly to others who might question the validity of helmet laws. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now.
Back to the streets of Seattle and Westlake Plaza. We took our cameras there earlier this week to see what was on people's minds, and here's what we learned.
Why is there a helmet law? Like, I think it's pretty much my head, and what I do with my own head is my problem, not, the rest of everybody else's.
And the bike messenger who talks about the helmet law.
Yeah.
Is that something that should just be his concern, or should it be everyone's concern?
That is his head. But if he hurts himself and becomes disabled, then it becomes all of our responsibility. He ends up at Harborview for months and months and years, being paid for by public tax dollars. So it is kind of a shared responsibility. And the King County Board of Health, appropriately, I believe, has said that helmets are required. And I'm sorry if it inconveniences him in his profession, but frankly, it would inconvenience him a lot more if he falls and his brain is damaged, and then it hurts the taxpayers and the rest of us as well.
So in that clip, right, he doesn't challenge the assertion, it's my head. He makes a very important concession there. That is his head. He's not saying, no, that is now common property. Everybody's head is ours. But rather he's saying, no, I understand why you would feel that way. The bike messenger is making an assertion of private right, of individual right. And the mayor is responding by saying there are more things at issue here. And it is a collective concern because we're talking about potential taxpayer expense. So he's responding to an individual concern with a larger social concern. Right, so you've got a response there, but it's one that tries to address an individual one with a larger concern, with some larger value at play. We can come back to that later under style, because you can hear how he's just looping in that language, that collective language, taxpayer expense, social responsibility, so on and so forth. But it's a way of responding to that argument. The final thing just to be thinking about in terms of crafting your counter responses, your counter arguments, is just addressing costs and benefits. It's real easy to sort through. If you're in favor of something, the costs are acceptable and the benefits are significant. If you're opposed to something, the costs are substantial and there are very few benefits. So you've got this sort of balancing back and forth, and that's something you can build evidence around. Say, well, there are some benefits, but they're not as significant as the other side would have you believe. Or the other side has talked about the cost, but I think the true costs are much more significant. So it's just another way of thinking around the issue, thinking of coming up with a counter-argument that's not necessarily aggressive or hostile. So ultimately, you have to be the judge as to whether motivating your audience actually requires you to deal with some counter-arguments. And this judgment is reached by balancing your persuasive goal against the target audience that you're dealing with. And I'd remind you to go back to that chart and think, where are you along that line? What is your target audience? Are they immediately going to disagree with you, be sort of neutral, or strongly agree with you? And so thinking in that way, do you actually need to address counter arguments? So having spent some time talking about counter-arguments, in the next lecture we're going to talk about, well, what do you do to finally motivate that audience? So we're going to be talking to calls to action.